When The Evil Dead was released in 1981-ish, it was fated as the future of horror by fans and acknowledged as the new benchmark by the industry, even before the sequel added a sense of humour to the formula.
We just cut up our girlfriend with a chainsaw.
But despite the original trilogy pushing gore and horror comedy about as far as they'd ever been before, I'm here for the horde of cockamamie Raimis who crashed and burned trying to take them even further.
It's only funny till someone loses an eye.
I've got the feeling that the worst is yet to come.
So there'll be unexpected impressions and some demonic possessions, while any enchanted limbs will be chopped and loose eyeballs popped, because we're going to follow the Raimi cam down the rabbit hole of Evil Dead knockoffs, cash-ins and fake-outs. So join us in a world where everyone hailed to the king.
Groovy.
Groovy.
Groovy! Come get some.
Usually I try to watch everything that might owe a debt to the Mother movie, but that's hard with this series, which effectively conceived the cabin in the woods subgenre, invented a new visual style, and revolutionised horror comedy, all of which means its influence can be found everywhere.
This is my stick! Ah! The movie's to blame for all this!
So I'm taking a more selective approach than usual, but we still begin in Italy, where Lamberto Bava conjured demons.
They will make cemeteries their cathedrals, and the cities will be your tombs. Will you survive it? Demons.
As with the original Evil Dead, Demons' humour is subtle, far from slapstick. And again, like Evil Dead, it deftly smashes together tropes of demonic possession and zombie horror, even using an idiot finding a Book of the Dead as the catalyst for The Conjuring.
It's in Latin. I can't figure it out. Yes, I can.
The ensuing outbreak of Kandarian demons is confined to a Berlin cinema that offers a suitably stylish backdrop to Bava's inventive excess, and hosts a variety of interesting characters, most memorably Bobby Rhodes' pimp, Tony.
Because of that scratch, she became a demon. An instrument of evil. Like they said in the damn movie, you heard them.
Stop the movie!
This meta-commentary on what Bava deemed an hysterical reaction to horror cinema's new frontier is less analytical deconstruction than playful flirtation, but it nevertheless adds an aspect of ironic self-analysis to an otherwise viscerally motivated film.
That's a bunch of shit, baby.
There's a Demons 2, and it's set in a high-rise apartment building that's subject to a demon outbreak when a horror movie showing on TV video deads itself into real life. Like in the first film, we keep jumping in and out of the movie within the movie, sometimes watching it, sometimes watching a kid watching it. But exactly what's happening isn't established, so at first it's not clear if he's a character in our movie or an omnipotent framing device in the other one. Either way, it makes you wonder where his parents are.
Hello. No, Daddy isn't home. Neither's Mommy. I'm alone. Yes, goodbye.
I'm sure that's fine. The unlucky ensemble also includes the members of a gym who decide to tackle the infestation by pushing cars about and shrieking.
It doesn't work! We're trapped!
A couple trapped in an elevator, a family, a dog lover, so you can guess how that goes, and a bunch of obnoxious teens having a party.
All right, that's enough. This is a respectable building. Get out.
It doesn't go well for any of them, but it does for us, because Bava's return to demonology is a blast. The music, which was a great strength of the first film with Motley Crue, Billy Idol and Saxon all contributing songs, this time has a more new wave vibe with The Cult, The Art of Noise and Winona Ryder partying to the Smiths. The pace is incredible as we dart about from group to group, watching a dollop of toxic bile infest the building. And although the exact means of infection remains unclear, its effect is routinely spectacular and uncompromising. At least the pregnant woman escapes.
What are you doing?
Just giving oxygen to our baby.
That's great.
Compared to either Demons movie, Andrea Marfori's Evil Clutch is reprehensible crap, but the English dub was handled by Troma, so it isn't entirely without purpose.
It's not all over. It'll never end.
From the opening scene, in which The Shining's minding its own business when it's run off the road by the evil dead, to the last, in which there isn't a single line of dialogue that isn't ridiculous.
You've never loved your little daughter, Daddy? You always treated her like a witch.
We can't go much further without acknowledging the La Casa franchise, which is to Evil Dead what the zombie franchise is to Dawn of the Dead, so an unofficial series of unrelated movies that hijack a popular title. The opportunity arose when Evil Dead was renamed La Casa, or The House, for its Italian release, with Evil Dead 2 later becoming La Casa 2, and then Umberto Lenzi's Ghost House La Casa 3 when it was renamed by producer Achille Manzotti.
I've got a bad feeling about this. I've got the feeling that the worst is yet to come. It's those kids.
Stop worrying. They're not in any danger anymore.
The plot follows tech nerd Marty McFly as he traces a mysterious radio broadcast to an abandoned house whose original owners were apparently Evil Dead fans.
Henrietta?
We've seen everything before, even the actual buildings recycled from Fulci's house by the cemetery. But all things considered, it's pretty good. Don't get your hopes up for the sequels, though.
I love you, Chief. I love you, Chief. I love you, Chief.
La Casa 4 followed just a few months later and was sold as a sequel to not only Evil Dead, but also Steve Miner's House, thereby extending this nomenclature nightmare to dizzying new heights. It has nothing to do with Miner's 1985 classic, or La Casa 3 for that matter, but it does feature David Hasselhoff doing an Irish accent.
Tell me, my lad, women will drive you around the bend. They'll put the very devil in you.
I have to go to the bathroom.
Regrettably, it isn't for the whole movie, which is a remake of Rosemary's Baby set in an abandoned hotel. But they had Linda Blair for a few days, so it's The Exorcist as well. La Casa 5 is the worst of the lot and revolves around a Catholic priest who moves with his wife and kids into a house that's already occupied by a variety of witches, ghosts and miscellaneous possessed whatnots, including the spirit of a recently executed serial killer somehow.
I didn't just murder all of those children. I also devoured their souls, which now are here inside of me.
The undead serial killer is a theme that would return in La Casa 7, which is also House 3, Horror House, and The Horror Show, but La Casa 5 is as far as I'm going, and even then only because it shares some of its cast and crew with Troll 2, including its easily impressed young star.
Look at that cool swan!
Of course, there are other ways to hijack a movie title in the hopes of confusing or amusing audiences into buying what you're selling, or redistributing. You can just add a few words to it. That's why there are 3 Evil Dead trap movies. Not to mention Evil Dead is Back, Return of the Evil Dead, Haunted Evil Dead, The Resurrected Evil Dead, Eye of the Evil Dead, Osombi the Axis of Evil Dead, Supermaster vs. Evil Dead, Shaolin vs. Evil Dead, and Holy Virgin vs. Evil Dead. As in Italy and the US, The Evil Dead didn't exactly incite a glut of direct imitations so much as establish a set of tropes and techniques that were borrowed with particular vehemence by movies including House 2, Spookies, Totem, and Forever Evil, which sets things up like Evil Dead but kills everyone off in the first act, and instead devotes the movie to a pair of old men trying to figure out what happened.
I'm getting too damn old for this, babe. I know what you mean. This would make Manson puke.
Strangely, the strictly defined cabin-in-the-woods trope didn't catch on until later, but as Forever Evil shows, small groups of teen friends were increasingly finding themselves trapped in isolated buildings full of POV cinematography. Even in Britain, where The Evil Dead was effectively banned due to the video nasties farce, filmmakers like Norman J. Warren had clearly been inspired. He also seems to have been a fan of The Shining and The Eagles.
Trapped in the Hotel of Horror. They can check out anytime, but they can never leave.
Beyond the Raimi influence, Bloody New Year has a style all of its own that's kind of fascinating. The plot involves a time warp device, a little like the Philadelphia experiments, which explains some of the anachronistic oddness. But there's an agelessness beyond that, both for the filmmaking and the way the characters look, behave and interact.
Ever since I was 4 years old and Rick gave me his old bike to play with, you've been chasing around behind me with a wrench and good advice.
And ever since I was 4, I've been listening to your rotten jokes, and they don't improve with age.
The performances in particular seem like they're from an age that only existed in 1980s BBC radio drama. I don't know if it'll translate for non-British audiences, but there's something very particular about this kind of acting.
I wonder what it's like doing it on a snooker table.
Doing what?
Hi, I'm Sam Raimi, the director of The Evil Dead. I've invited Jonathan Ross to see my new movie, Evil Dead 2. Oh, I don't believe this.
The even more extreme and much funnier Evil Dead 2 was released in March 1987, and in a way proved even more influential than its predecessor, spearheading a new wave of, if not quite self-aware, then at least self-suspicious horror.
All right, dudes! And dudesses! Let's party!
Night of the Demons poses the question what would happen if teens broke into a cursed mortuary on Halloween night, held a seance, and then started in the coffins.
Oh, Max, I don't bend that way.
Turns out it's not good.
The party's just begun.
The fan-favourite makeup effects are the work of Steve Johnson, who a few years earlier created Ghostbusters Slimer and would go on to design the aliens in the Abyss. He also ended up marrying actress Linnea Quigley after casting her breasts for the movie's flagship lipstick nipple shtick.
Oh, shit. Not you too. What, is everybody here on drugs or something?
Sort of Killer Angela returns in a pair of sequels, the first of which was directed by Brian Trenchard Smith. This time, the kids are inmates of a Catholic school for troubled teens aged 30 to 45, and the plot has them going AWOL to a party in the first movie's still abandoned Hull House. But it isn't really interested in Evil Dead, with Trenchard Smith bringing his own style and humour. The third film's just stupid.
Are you listening to me?
You wrinkled my uniform. And you broke my window.
Are you listening to me? I need your help.
That's what I'm here for, miss.
Please get the gun away from me.
In Night of the Demons 3, tearaway teens end up holed up in Hull House on Halloween night, where they meet the series' strangely anonymous antagonist. By now, it's apparent how much the previous movies relied on their non-demon characters, and that's where Part 3 comes up short.
Are you listening to me?
This is not my gun, little missy. This is my pistol. This is my gun, this is for shooting, and this is for fun!
What the hell are you talking about, you idiot?
There's also a remake which does a reasonably fun job of recycling the first movie's more endearing and enduring moments, and gets top marks for the Linnea Quigley cameo and the update to her famous scene.
I saw,
What? Well, what did you see?
She stuck a lipstick in her boob and it fell out of her okay?
Rabid Grannies goes even further and weirder with the comedy when a pair of elderly aunts are possessed by demons during a family reunion, which scuppers dinner and makes a mockery of the title Rabid Grannies. Sometimes it's hard to know what's meant to be funny because having been shot in Belgium with French actors speaking phonetic English, it was then dubbed by lunatics.
I don't know what you're up to, but if all it is to get her in your bed, I'll warn you now, she hasn't had enough to drink yet.
You old ghost, see the cobwebs off your ass and piss off.
This kind of grotesque farce in what's a legitimately scary movie is very much a Sam Raimi kind of thing, and he did a lot to rejuvenate horror comedy with it.
Thanks, babe.
Horror and comedy have been movie bedfellows since the silent era, but by the 1950s, the arch-wit of filmmakers like James Whale had been replaced by the broad parody of people like Abbott and Costello.
Barricaded! He can't get in here!
That's an oversimplification, and there were exceptions. Just look at whatever it is Vincent Price invented. But regardless of how you look at it, horror comedy began to change in the late 70s, with, among others, the pointed satire of George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and soon after the black comedy of John Landis's An American Werewolf in London.
Have you ever talked to a corpse?
It's boring.
The first Evil Dead, which was released a few months earlier, kept its powder pretty dry with only a little light relief. But horror comedy continued to evolve with, among others, Slumber Party Massacre, Return of the Living Dead, and Stuart Gordon's Reanimator.
You'll never get credit for my discovery. Who's going to believe a talking head? Get a job in a sideshow.
By the time Raimi and Buddy Scott Spiegel came to write Evil Dead 2, they'd clearly decided horror was ready to go full Stooges, perhaps having been influenced by the farting monsters of Spookies. Whether or not it's the same flavour, comedy's played a more significant role in horror cinema ever since, making it hard to imagine everything from the down-to-earth deadpan of Slither to the nihilistic satire of Bodies, Bodies, Bodies without it.
Oh! Are you serious? Did you just shoot me? No. You shot me! With a gun!
The Dead Come Home isn't quite as funny as some, but it owes no less of a debt to Evil Dead 2 as a result, borrowing as it does its basic setup and a good deal of its tone for a slice of schlock about kids renovating a house with a bloody history and a demonic squatter.
Can we help you? Hey, if she doesn't stop staring at us, I'm gonna go over there and smack her.
There's no plot to speak of, the demon granny's even more obviously a man in drag than Henrietta, and none of the characters have actual characters, each being easily reduced to a single line description, such as the one who looks like Danny Aiello and the one who can't open things. The one who can't open things is the best because the extent to which he can't open things is so extraordinary.
I'm not gonna be beat by some stupid door that's stuck.
Despite these limitations, The Dead Come Home, which was later distributed as Dead Dudes in the House in an attempt to cash in on that infamous early 90s kid and play boom, is a lovely way to spend 90 minutes. The One Who Can't Open Things really is funny. Director James Riffle's engagingly committed to his gore, and the vibe's nicely weird.
I found this dug deeply into Steve's skull. And I think that's beautiful.
I'm not sure about the riffs on The Shining though. While they do give the one who can't open things a solution to his eternal problem, the actors really aren't up to the monologues.
What about my responsibilities, huh? Dearest Snookum? I often wondered what goes on inside your head. And now I'm gonna find out. I'm gonna take that piece of wood and bash your skull in and really have a look-see.
Did you bring the daggers and the diary?
Demon Wind is about as close as you can get to an on-paper remake of Evil Dead, but although the plot's almost identical, the feel's completely different, with a first half that channels 80s TV movie banality, and a second apparently inspired by Lucio Fulci. Ever constant though is the dickhead nobody likes.
Thanks for coming. I mean that. Yeah, well, if you two homos can keep your hands off each other for a second, let's get something to drink.
I could spin this out for a few minutes talking about the effects and how delightful they are, the B-movie all-star cast, what a dedicated fan base it has, and how the character Stephen Quadros plays is a magician for no reason. In fact, I'd say pretty much anything to put off what's next, which, according to my script, is 1989's Things.
Oh no! No! No!
How'd that movie start that you're always talking about? You know, that weird one with all those weird things?
Things is the work of Canadian amateur filmmakers Andrew Jordan and Barry Gillis, and it tells the tale of three friends trapped in a cabin with a horde of genetic aberrations intent on eating them. That's the extent of the plot, but it's the bizarre execution that's made this one of the most notoriously awful horror movies of the 80s.
What the f*** are you talking about?
Things has been branded the worst film ever made by outlets including Dread Central, Screen Rant and Cinema Sewer, and in 2022 Riff Tracks described it as the worst they'd ever riffed. In a way, it's hard to disagree, although I'd rewatch it any time over Slaughter Day, in which kids in Hawaii read aloud from H.R. Giger's Necronomicon and then battle a possessed gas mask.
Be careful with that thing! No! Oh no! Get away!
Things is too strange and ultimately too endearing to justify the title worst ever, although it is hard to imagine a movie with more problems. It feels unscripted, like it was shot on a whim, with lengthy scenes involving nothing more than men sitting in silence, and when they do talk to one another it only highlights the fact they've all been shot separately.
Dr. Lucas found a way to artificially impregnate her. Something went wrong. I'll say.
Shut up!
The sound fluctuates between inaudible and startling depending on what it least needs to be at any given moment. The camera's maniacally committed to not capturing whatever it is that's going on, and the dialogue was without question written by something that's never met a human.
My wife's dead, and all you can do is sit there and tell about some weird story that you read in some sci-fi novel?
You might think all this goes without saying for an amateur horror movie shot on Super 8, but if you haven't seen it, it's important to stress Things is almost certainly more technically inept than you're imagining.
The dead creatures were probably eaten or taken away by the others.
You're watching too many horror movies, pal. This place is empty.
But it has heart and ambition, in a way, thanks to some commentary on fertility.
I said I wanted you to have my baby.
But mostly it has heart. Making a bad movie like this isn't any easier than making a good one, and these guys obviously busted a gut. That passion's on the screen, whether or not you can see it through all the weirdness.
Throw this in the freezer.
If we're talking about the influence of Evil Dead, we should probably talk about the influences on Evil Dead, because no movie springs from the ether. At the creative core of the franchise is a group of friends formed in and around various Michigan-based educational establishments in the mid-70s, and that went on to make a number of short films together. There were signs of what was to come in several of them, but the most important was Within the Woods. Written and directed by Sam Raimi and starring Bruce Campbell and Ellen Sandweiss, it was pretty much a half-hour dry run for the Evil Dead.
You're only cursed by the evil spirits if you violate the graves of the dead. We're just going to be eating hot dogs.
Prior to Within the Woods and its predecessor Clockwork, Raimi and Campbell weren't particularly well versed in horror, so having decided to experiment with it, first immersed themselves in it with a deep dive at the local drive-ins. When they returned to the surface, it was with a particular fondness for George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which Raimi had first seen and been traumatized by as a child, and Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So he set out in part to replicate them.
You don't want to go fooling around other folks' property. Some folks don't like it, and they don't mind showing you.
Raimi was drawn to Living Dead and Chainsaw for their relentless intensity, but became just as interested in the lo-fi practicality that got them made in the first place, both movies being shaped by their limited budgets.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Night of the Living Dead, Halloween, they're all raw, relentless. And the directors were so resourceful with what they had at their disposal.
He took that on board, along with stylistic cues from Italian horrors like Mario Bava's Black Sunday and Dario Argento's Suspiria, while other movies often pointed to by commentators include Night of the Demon, The Exorcist, demonic Bigfoot nonsense Equinox, and Japanese What the F***a-thon Howzu. Of course, Army of Darkness, the final film of the original trilogy, demonstrates an additional set of influences, specifically the stop-motion adventure movies of Ray Harryhausen, the Universal horror classics, and Mark Twain's novel A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Hallelujah. Travel back to Camelot with Bing Crosby, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
But the most universal and obvious influences across the whole franchise are the ubiquitous H.P. Lovecraft, whose Ancient Demons and Necronomicon Ex Mortis, or Book of the Dead, are integral to everything, and these guys.
Where's the leak, boy? In the basement.
Where's the basement?
Upstairs! Up to the basement!
To the basement!
To the basement!
Campbell, producer Rob Tappert, and especially the Raimi brothers and Scott Spiegel were big Three Stooges fans, and the movies they made don't let you forget it, especially the second and third in the series, which feature a lot more comedy than the first.
So they grab grapes. Hit them with a salvo, boys. They put them in their elbows. They put in the grapes, and he goes, oh! Only this is the horror version of it.
Chief among Evil Dead's most frequently imitated elements is its look, its madly twisting POV dolly shots, bizarre camera angles, and stylized sets, which might be traced back to German Expressionism, Italian giallos, spaghetti westerns, Orson Welles, Alfred Hitchcock, or a number of others. The whole cabin-in-the-woods setup is something else Raimi popularized. Despite seeming like it should have been a horror movie staple since the silent era, the idea of 5 young friends getting away from it all for a few days in a remote cabin, only to be picked off one by one by some kind of demon, monster or psycho, was almost unique in 1981. There were isolated locations where bad stuff happened.
You're going to Camp Blood, ain't you? God damn it, Ralph, get out of here. Go on, get! Leave people alone! You'll never come back again.
But the true cabin in the woods is different. It's hard or impossible to reach by car and often in an unfriendly environment. The ownership's usually vague, with our characters, generally limited to about half a dozen, often not supposed to be there. And of course there's never a working phone or nowadays cell reception. It's a smaller, more remote and less protective environment than a house or a summer camp. The cabin in the woods is a big trope, but it's often the smaller ones that fans and movie magpies home in on, and these are drawn from all three movies in the original trilogy. The spooky swing, floating demons, Lovecraft's Book of the Dead, the dismembered hand, the sawn-off shotgun, and of course the chainsaw, and most of all, the eminently misquotable dialogue.
Undead before dawn! Undead before dawn!
But when these show up in other movies, it tends to be homage rather than imitation, a slightly cleverer way of letting your audience know you're a fan than simply pasting an Evil Dead poster on the wall, like they do in Frostbiter, Wrath of the Wendigo. Evil Ed, Science Crazed, How to Make a Monster, Kingdom of the Vampires, 976 Evil, Stranger Things, Dead and Breakfast, The Dead Next Door, Numbered with the Dead, Jennifer's Body, Frankenstrom, Serial Mum, Promutos, Tarnation, The House of Wax remake, The Black Devil Doll remake, Video Violence 2, Shadow Zone 2, Tempo, Dark Ride, Game Boys Doghouse, Bad Friends, Flashback, A Cadaver Christmas, Space, and the unparalleled Revenge of Billy the Kid, which is about a farmer who's in a loving relationship with his goat.
Did she get a good shaft in Park? Best she ever had.
In 1992, Army of Darkness rounded out the original trilogy with a curveball supernatural adventure set in the medieval era teased at the end of Evil Dead 2. A couple of months prior to that, though, a young filmmaker from New Zealand showed he'd been paying attention to Raimi's films for a while.
Stay back, boy. This calls for divine intervention.
Peter Jackson's Brain Dead or Dead Alive isn't exactly beholden to Evil Dead, it's too accomplished in its own right. But Jackson's often spoken of his admiration for Raimi and his skill in deploying comedy during moments of horror, something he's clearly found inspiring, although the Kiwi's sense of humour is quite different to the Americans.
Come on, mate. I'm dying for a slash. I've got a urinary infection.
And to be honest, so is his horror, because there isn't any. There's plenty of gore, but little in the way of tension ratcheting. Nevertheless, Evil Dead's DNA is everywhere in this marvellous burst of demented creativity. Shot on 8mm film stock by star Shinji Fukazawa, Bloody Muscle Bodybuilder in Hell is a low-budget extravaganza of over-the-top gore and under-the-influence filmmaking that took its creator 17 years to complete. But as with many of the movies in this video, I can't share the best bits on an unrestricted YouTube channel. It's a subtle plug for my Patreon.
Sayonara, baby.
Evil Dead was popular in Japan, where coincidentally or otherwise there's a whole subgenre of movies in which faux schoolgirls attach weapons to stumped limbs, especially chainsaws. In fact, all Japanese faux schoolgirls seem to love chainsaws. In Mutant Girl Squad, there's even one who can grow them out of her ass. Back in the US, things were a little more low-key, maybe too low-key at times. Savage Harvest requires an 8-minute campsite monologue just to explain itself, and it's about the most exciting scene in the movie.
Oh, well, that's just f***ing great.
But you can keep things low-key without them being boring. There's more than a little Don Dola to Frostbiter, Wrath of the Wendigo, which kicks off when Bill Hicks kills some kind of gatekeeping oddball, prompting a demon hunter to fly in and investigate.
What the hell is jumping on my plane?
You've got to get down!
I can't even sing!
It's a thoroughly charming hangout movie that comes tailor-made for a drinking game, requiring contestants to take a shot every time the background music makes them laugh. There's a scene scored by what sounds like African tribal chanting and another 80s hair metal. Negotiations between pilot and demon hunter are conducted to country music, which segues into big band jazz for their actual flight. Voiceover gets new age panpipes, while gospel was deemed appropriate for a scene in which a door's barricaded shut, punk for one in which the hillbilly hunters get leathered, and sub-Prince pop funk for another documenting the disposal of some haunted chili. In 1996, we learnt things aren't much safer down south when Fred Williamson and some other people exposed a colony of Texan vampires in From Dusk Till Dawn. Robert Rodriguez's movie feels like Evil Dead 2 at times, and its sequel even more so, which probably isn't a surprise given it was directed by Evil Dead 2 co-writer Scott Spiegel. Bruce Campbell cameos while Robert Patrick stars in a movie with the distinction of being a band-apart production, and there's a kind of house dialogue that makes you wonder about the possibility of an unofficial Quentin Tarantino rewrite.
This movie's very low quality.
It's a movie. I don't watch a movie for the story. I watch a movie to see
I personally appreciate an attempt at telling a story. When I care more about the characters, I care more about the
Don't look that bad to me.
My main complaint about this movie here is we've been watching it for a half hour and there ain't been no.
There's other good stuff too, but over the border in New Mexico, things were even better.
Hello, kiddies. So glad you could join me. Your old pal, the Crypt Keeper, has gone Hollywood in a big way.
The first of 3 feature-length movies based on HBO's Tales from the Crypt TV series features a very silly mythology dating back to before the beginning of time, when demons used magic keys to focus the power of the cosmos and bring darkness to the nothing that didn't exist yet. Apparently, when God arrived, he put a stop to their fun by scattering the keys, but most were found, leading him to fill the final one with the blood of Christ, and entrust it to a string of custodians that's led all the way down to this familiar face.
I get that a lot. I've been on TV.
Yeah. Me too.
Boss demon Billy Zane has tracked hero immortal William Sadler down to a rural hotel, but fortunately for those trapped inside, the blood of a World War I soldier prevents him entering.
God damn it, I'm not making these rules up!
The ensuing siege is a perfectly judged blend of the tense, the horrific, and the absurd. Director Ernest Dickerson nailing an excellent screenplay by Ethan Reif and Cyrus Voris, who'd go on to pen Kung Fu Panda.
Is that a yes?
No. That's me giving you the finger, asshole.
They also out themselves as Murder, She Wrote fans, at least in my mind, because in honour of Tom Bosley's original lawman,
Sheriff Tupper here.
they named their sheriff Tupper.
What?
My interest begins to wane when it comes to talking about movies of the new millennium, but that doesn't mean there haven't been some good ones. Eli Roth's Cabin Fever obviously needs a mention.
Gonna go shoot some squirrels.
Why would you want to kill squirrels?
Because they're gay?
Less well known, maybe because it's almost impossible to get hold of, is The Hazing, which features an excellent Nectar Rose as a sorority pledge who spends the first hour pretending to be a bimbo before revealing she's really an intelligent badass who fakes idiocy to manipulate boys. That's good news for everybody because she's the only one capable of making sound judgment calls.
Slice the bitch, she's a f***ing demon.
That's essentially the same trick the movie itself plays because it segues effortlessly from a generic teen horror with worrying early signs of fanboy leanings into an expertly crafted blend of Evil Dead and Scream.
Couldn't Professor Caps's spirit just leave his body and enter someone else?
Oh, didn't think of that.
You should have!
However, this era's real goldmine isn't American tributes to Evil Dead, but Indian ones. Bat Kazara starts with a disclaimer proudly announcing that none of the characters are based on person, living or dead, but it doesn't say anything about Evil Dead. Most of it's here, including a Necronomicon that steals artwork from the poster for Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
Disgustingly awful.
There's only one original song, but at least it kind of fits the tone, which is more than you can say of the entirely unrelated music video inserted into the first act after the film was completed. The distractingly incongruous pop ditty comes out of nowhere, much like the occasional snatches of English that pepper the dialogue.
यहाँ कोई है, कोई supernatural thing.
Supernatural? You mean bhoot woot? Stop this nonsense, sweetie. Yaar, we all are educated, yaar. Don't talk like a stupid.
But Kazara is among the most faithful Evil Dead imitations, but just a year earlier an even more devoted remake emerged from Hyderabad's Telugu language industry. The kid's car is less iconic, but otherwise this is a straightforward remake that hits most of the obvious beats. But that's not all. Unusually for a modern Indian film, it also steals music from Hollywood movies like The Omen. But that's still not all, because even more unusually for a modern Indian movie, it also steals actual footage from its inspiration. And if you freeze frame near the start of this shot, you can actually catch the end of the Evil Dead 2 title on screen.
Something illegal's going on here.
All this means you can watch scenes from Raimi's film scored by the likes of The Lord of the Rings. Stealing footage like this is at least logical because it requires skill and resources to create it. But there are two strange things going on here. First, of course, the stolen footage appears to have been filmed off a TV screen, which, I mean, there's not much you can say about that. And second, they could easily have shot most of it themselves. Usually, light-fingered filmmakers steal only what they need, but director D. Rangarao gives the impression of throwing in stolen shots just because they're closer to hand, and it creates all kinds of problems. For example, this is where the action unfolds, but when someone's spooked by a presence outside, we cut to stolen footage showing a completely different building. Could they really not have managed a bit of their own Raimi cam in their own driveway? Yeah, okay. When the cast aren't being assailed by stolen footage, they're usually talking dramatically, often at the same time, and that tends to attract anyone who might have been elsewhere being assailed by stolen footage. The result is an exponential spiral of clamour that surely can't be discernible even if you speak Telugu. This shot goes on for over a minute, and at no point are there fewer than 3 people speaking at once. It gets to the point where you can see it coming, which somehow makes it funny even before it's funny. Back in the West, audiences were apparently developing a taste for ultra-meta navel-gazing, with both Cabin in the Woods and Tucker and Dale vs. Evil doing very well for themselves by deconstructing Evil Dead. They're an interesting comparison because they each do it so differently. Cabin in the Woods turning conventions on their head in order to comment on them, Tucker and Dale doing so in order to have fun with them.
We have had a doozy of a day.
A real doozy.
There we were.
Yep.
Minding our own business. When all of a sudden, out of nowhere, these kids started killing themselves all over my property.
But perhaps the most obvious example of Evil Dead derivatives looking in on themselves is 2013's remake, although this trend even extended to fan films. Evil Dead Inbred Rednecks comes with its own built-in horror host to comment on the movie as it's happening. Lucky us.
Ha! What the f***? You perverts! Can a domestic goddess take a shit around here without you Get back to the movie!
Evil Dead's influence has come back strong since all the diversification and deconstruction, and in the last decade or so, the Bornless Ones, Demon Legacy, The Cemetery, and the god-awful Lake Fear have all emerged from the US looking strikingly familiar. And then there's Sweden's Wither, Japan's Visitors, New Zealand's Deathgasm, and Australia's Tarnation, which naturally features a demon kangaroo, and an opinion on Lake Fear.
It was like a f***ing bag of AIDS.
These analogues show Evil Dead's followed the usual pattern in one respect, with it taking around a generation for its imitations to come full circle, after experimenting with variations. What's unusual is how many there are, but also the way the tropes and archetypes have been subsumed by the wider horror genre. The death trap cabin in the woods, the Raimi cam cinematography, and especially the tension-cutting humour are now universal staples of horror cinema in their own right.
If I weren't about to shit my pants, I'd be f***ing fascinated.
All that, and it keeps being reinterpreted in ways people actually appreciate. The latest in a string of video games is about to be released. There's a brilliant musical which has been staged off Broadway and on the Vegas Strip, a hugely popular TV series in Ash vs. the Evil Dead, which allegedly has an animated spin-off in the works. And most recently, movie reimagining Evil Dead Rise, which audiences and fans actually seem to like.
Groovy. Groovy.
Very groovy!
That seems like a nice positive note to end on, so thanks for watching and see you next time.
It's not all over.
Yes, it is, you slut.